This time on An Architect's Perspective, I sit down with the award-winning architect John Pardey to explore one of modernism's most quietly radical houses, Can Lis by Jørn Utzon. We unpack how Utzon drew from nature, local building methods and the Mallorcan environment to create a building that feels both ancient and completely modern. We also hear John Pardey's personal memories of meeting Utzon inside Can Lis. Let's take a listen. Today we're in Hampshire, meeting with the architect John Pardey. John established the practice now commonly referred to as JPA in 1988. Since that time, the firm has gone on to win several architectural awards, including the 2013 Welsh Gold Medal for Architecture. Alain de Botton, in reference to a house designed by JPA, stated, "Pardey's building is a reminder of the truth in Stendhal's aphorism, beauty is the promise of happiness." However, our conversation today will focus on the work of the Pritzker Prize-winning architect Jørn Utzon. In 2001, John Pardey had the enormous privilege of meeting both Jørn and his wife, Liz. This meeting and his visit to the house Can Lis launched John's personal quest to write the monograph titled Utzon. John, it's great to be here at your studio on the south coast of England. To get started, I'd love for you to tell us a little bit more about yourself in your own words.
So I was born in the New Forest, a little village. Had a very happy, rural upbringing. Nice family, on my own in the woods. A bit like Utzon, I think. Not that I want to compare myself to that man, because he's a genius. But what set me out a little bit was I was very good at drawing. So that sort of, I had adult attention because I could draw really quite well, very young. So I got into a part-time architecture course in the Ghastly South Bank Polytechnic. I mean, why do architecture courses always seem to be in the ugliest buildings in London? But they are. And I loved it. I excelled. I eventually switched over to Central London Polytechnic. And along the way, as growing up, my father's friend was a Dutch guy, a very elderly man who took a shine to me because I could draw. And he used to constantly talk to me about architecture and told me I must be an architect. And he was showing me all these drawings and paintings actually as well. I found out once I got to architecture school, he died that first year, that he had been a co-signatory of the Steel Manifesto, the first, probably most important art movement of the 20th century. Like, wow. And he was friends with Bart van der Lek, Theo van Doesburg, and Pierre Mondrian, the painter. So, pretty amazing. He actually worked with Frank Lloyd Wright in 1914. Actually worked with him. He talked to me about it. Right. We actually co-designed a gallery together for an English friend. Wow. To do with Augustus John, I remember.
So you're at part-time university in London, and then it was in your second year that you came across a particular book.
Yeah, I loved the library in that building. I hated the building. The course was fine, but I was indoctrinated into everything Le Corbusier, early Le Corbusier, white villas, which is great. But yeah, second year, I remember sitting in that library and opening a book, and it was like, wow, I've got it. And it was Utzon's housing, his courtyard housing.
In Denmark.
I just fell for it, like hook, line. It's like falling in love.
And this was the contrast you saw between the international style, Absolutely. As Johnson called it, everything's white, to maybe more hyper-regional, hyper-contextual.
It was all of that, yeah. And the idea of using natural materials. Remember, I loved wood and making things. Right. So it was wood, it was brick, it was nothing flashy. I remember going to Villa Savoye in my first year and being so disappointed that it was cracked and stained.
And just for the audience, the Villa Savoye is just on it's now in Paris, but at the time it was on the outskirts, designed by Le Corbusier in the early
1929.
1929, yeah. Okay. And so you'd been to Villa, and this was the contrast that you were enjoying between Villa Savoye and Utzon's work.
Yes, and is it Frank Lloyd Wright? I said that's the problem with buildings. You put them out, you put a work of art out in the rain. Well, Villa Savoye certainly didn't knock me out. Intellectually, wow, everything, incredible. Like Corb generally is extraordinary, isn't he? He's the Picasso of art, of architecture.
And what year did you visit Villa Savoye?
I'm going to be awful with dates.
Well, roughly. Was it before you looked at Utzon's book, or was it after?
Oh, before.
Oh, okay. So you had the benefit of looking at the Villa Savoye, and now you've come across Utzon. You're on your journey.
Exactly. And Utzon was the touchstone. It was like when I met my wife. It was love at first sight, literally. Right. Bang. Like that. I looked in her eyes and I was done for. I looked on that book, and that was me done. But it set me on my path.
So there you were, second year of university. You'd had the benefit of learning about modernism. It was Utzon's work now starting to come through in your own projects in
definitely.
year 3. And how did the tutors see the ideas of Utzon percolating through your work? Was that welcomed at the time, or was it still
Yes,
the
to be honest, it
indoctrination
was. Yes, it
of the
was.
modernism movement?
Yes, I think they took the view if I did it well, it was good.
And the relationship between Utzon and Corb, how did they overlap, and have you got any insights to that before we move on?
Utzon definitely adored Corb's later work, less so the earlier work. We spoke about it at some length. And he told me he dropped into Paris and actually visited him when he was in his studio at the top of the building on whatever it's called, street. And I think it's dangerous meeting your heroes. Okay, I did with Utzon. But I think meeting Corb was a little bit difficult. Like, he gave him
For
lunch.
Utzon.
It was a plate of lettuce and a glass of water. I remember that. Why would you invite somebody for lunch and give them a plate of lettuce and a glass of water?
Yeah, because in contrast, from what I know, Louis Kahn, I think there's a famous letter to Corb saying, checking in almost, how am I doing, Corb? Particularly during the time of India. So are we sort of thinking that Corb didn't really like the work of Utzon?
No, he adored Utzon's Sydney Opera House. That's what he was travelling for. In fact, Corb was commissioned to do the big tapestries in the Opera House.
Right.
There are drawings and paintings of that.
And those tapestries are still there in the...
They never got made, but because Utzon was kicked off the job and it was all about cost and all that stuff. So I believe in his own house, he's got one of the mock-ups for that. That's what it was, the tapestry.
The tapestry.
In his own house, yeah.
In Denmark?
In Denmark, yeah.
Oh, fantastic.
So he adored Corbusier's later work, no question.
And so Corb was reflecting on the Opera House? Wow.
Yeah, Corb was commissioned to do the tapestries for the Opera House, which is pretty special.
And so due to cost overruns and such like, Corb never actually got to deliver...
Never got to do it, no.
Wow. So John, one of the things about Jørn was the driving force behind him, his wife, Lis. Maybe you could talk a little bit about that relationship. You had the privilege of meeting them both, and you would have been exposed to what was going on in that relationship. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about that.
Well, I met them in 2001. I think it was April, in Mallorca. And that came about, if I may, just to describe, I was lecturing. I couldn't get enough work, late 30s or whatever. One of my colleagues was Richard Weston. In fact, he was head of school briefly. And he and I always ended up talking about the work of Utzon. And Richard's a writer, one of the best in the world then. And he said, why don't we do a book on Utzon? Looking at me because I could draw to do the illustrations that didn't exist. We knew there were no drawings of the houses, for instance. I said, yeah, fine. So I did some drawings. Richard did a bit of writing. I edited it. We put it together. And Torsten, who's obsessed with quality, printed it beautifully, came back to me, and I had to send it to Jørn Utzon, architect, Mallorca. This is true. And I sent it. You know, just a quick note saying, we're English, we want to do a book on you.
And roughly what year?
2000.
2000, yeah.
And a few weeks later, the phone rang. And my daughter was then about 10. She answered the phone. She was on the phone for ages before she came to me and said, Dad, there's a man on the phone. He speaks funny, because he's Danish, of course. He wants to talk to you. And it was him. Of course, I thought it was somebody playing a game. It was him. And we chatted, and he sounded lovely and just a person, which of course he was. He said, well, come and see me. When? This weekend, 11 o'clock. There's a bench in the square at Savotta. Meet you there. Put the phone down. So I got there with Richard. We got on the plane. We went there.
Wow.
So I got on the plane with Richard, and we sat on the bench. An old battered white Rover car arrived. He loved everything English. Out came these two very tall, very elderly people. I didn't actually think it was him. And he had big black sunglasses on. And he walked over and said, you must be the English architects. That's how we met. I didn't feel I'd met the hero I recognised in books because he wore these big black sunglasses. It was many hours later, having lunch, he took them off, and I went, whoa, that's my hero. It's a nice way to meet my hero. I met my hero, but at the same time, He was just a man.
Yeah.
And I just started chatting to him, and he took an enormous interest in what I was doing.
And was Liz measuring with you as well?
Yeah, of course. And there was one time, I think it was probably the second day, there was all the people there, the publisher and Richard, the writer, and Liz. And he just grabbed my hand and said, I'm going to have a chat with John now, leave us alone. And we walked into the living room of Can Lis with a big crescent-shaped sofa and sat there. And we must have sat there for over an hour, just as only babies and old men can do. He held my hand the whole time. It was so touching. And he talked about the house, his life, my work. I actually was stupid enough to show him what I was working on. He was really encouraging.
Right.
But stupid, really.
So there you were, sitting on a sofa, holding hands with Jørn Utzon. What was Liz doing at this time,
She was doing lunch or something. Yeah, in the kitchen. Yeah. And everybody else kept out of the way because I'd been told. But that was Jørn. He was very warm.
Yeah.
Very warm.
Yeah.
And he liked English architects. He was really a bit obsessed with English culture and particularly comedy programs. The number of times he imitated Basil Fawlty was so funny. Really good at that.
I mean, he was a tall man, probably more akin to John Cleese than Basil Fawlty.
Yes, he was. Very tall. He's about 6'4", I think. He'd been taller.
So in terms of Liz, his wife?
I've never seen an old couple always hand in hand, even walking around the house. She was like a carer for him. She looked after him.
Yeah.
He'd been very fragile after the Sydney Opera thing collapsed.
Yeah.
Very fragile.
Because I think she's gone on record and said, trouble is that everyone just expects so much of John.
That's what she said. I mean, and he's just a man. That's what she said.
Yeah. I mean, if you can imagine, as you say, there he was working in the north of Denmark, in a relatively modest building, and he won the most significant architectural competition of the 20th century, which spawned things, Frank Gehry saying things like, he made a building well ahead of our time, far ahead of available technology, and he persevered through extraordinary malicious publicity and negative criticism to build a building that changed the image of an entire country.
It's extraordinary, isn't it?
Yeah.
And in terms of Sydney, he said, it's in my head. I don't need to see it. It's like a symphony. So that was it. I mean, I'm not obsessed with the Sydney Opera House, so I'll say that now. It's beautiful. But you can't really learn much from it, apart from the principles of organic form on a base. That was consistent in all his work, really.
Right. John, it's in the 1960s, and I believe that the Utzon family left Australia almost in sort of exile. And they did have some family members in Mallorca already, as I understand it. But maybe you could talk a little bit about how Jørn and Liz found this particular site.
I know that he left Sydney in 1966, and he fully expected to go back. He thought that the politics were being horrible to him. They were. His nemesis was the Minister for Public Works of the new Labour government.
And if we could set this scene, as you say, it's a new Labour government. The commission actually was awarded under the previous government. So now we've got budget overruns. Yeah. We've got a change of political system. And at that time, major public projects usually come under some scrutiny. So
that's exactly what happened. And of course, the budget was spiralling, like national projects do, don't they?
Yes. Yeah.
But he was held up as the wayward, Danish architect,
scapegoat,
just ignoring the budget. And of course, the budget wasn't realistic.
Yes. Well, I read that had they ever done a proper bill of quantities and estimate at the start, the building would have never been built.
Correct.
So in a way, thank God they didn't.
Yes, absolutely. And that's true of a lot of buildings, I think, isn't it?
So they're now in exile or escaped a lot of criticism?
So they left. He was thinking he'd be asked back as a major project. He spent, I think, 9 years of his life on it. And it hurt. He didn't go back. And I know he had a bit of a nervous breakdown, and Liz, ever present, nursed him through it. I did say to him when I was with him, I'll go back with you if you want. And Liz just said, no, it will kill him. Simple as that. He would never go back. He couldn't go back.
Interesting. That said, the Australian government did pay the final fee that was outstanding.
That's right.
And there's a refurbishment of the Sydney Opera House.
That's right.
Yeah. So, John, as we mentioned, Jørn had left Australia now, and he was in Mallorca, and he was inspired by this site. Can you talk a little bit about potentially his thoughts that were going through his mind as he inspected this site for sale?
Sure. I think particularly southeast Mallorca, it's just like being in New South Wales. It's got the same kind of light, same climate, very, very similar.
From what I understand, Jørn was particularly inspired by the sea. The climate was somewhat Sydney-esque, if that's the right expression.
Yep.
The flora and fauna, to a certain extent, reminded him of Australia. So somehow he's got that connection.
That is true. It is very much, southeast Mallorca's very much like New South Wales. It's kind of quite hard. And I know he found the sites by chatting to a couple of farmers when he was over on a visit. And the farmers had 3 sites for sale. I think one was called Paradise, one Beautiful, one Marvellous. So he bought Paradise and Beautiful. Paradise was up on the hill, about 10 kilometres inland on the mountain.
And that was the site of his subsequent house?
Second house. But the planning authorities weren't happy. They didn't want it developed at that time. So he built the house at Can Lis, which is called Beautiful.
Right.
It's literally a ledge overlooking the ocean. And sitting on the sofa, he just said to me, there's nothing here until Africa.
Yeah.
Which is lovely. And I think also he wanted to escape Denmark because the Danish Association of Architects, whatever they're called, the Royal Academy or whatever, had simply said to him, there's no work for architects who've let the country down.
Yes.
They saw him leaving Sydney as betraying Danish architecture, which of course it wasn't.
Okay.
But he suffered with that.
And so this was a site that brought him joy because of that connection to Australia, the warmth.
Without question.
By the sea.
And away from the world.
Yeah.
He didn't interact with the world after he arrived in Mallorca.
He was sort of shunning the world in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think Liz was part of that. She didn't want him to be hurt anymore.
Yeah.
Because it was vicious what happened to him at a global level.
Did he convey himself that hurt?
Yes and no. I mean, the wonderful thing was, of course, both Richard and I, looking for a story, pushed him about Sydney. And he refused. He was just a gentleman, refused to criticise anybody, even the man that had absolutely shot him through the head. Right. You know, it's all at the time. You know, it was then.
Sort of water off a duck's back.
Yeah, well, no, it had hurt, but he couldn't revisit it.
He'd packaged it up and put it in a certain space that...
And Liz clearly protected him, very clearly.
Yeah.
And remember, they wouldn't do interviews. We only got there because, A, we were British, and it was probably time. He was 82, I think, when I met him.
Sure. John, for the people that haven't actually seen Can Lis or had the privilege of visiting it, can you just describe a little bit about the house and some of its features and so forth?
So when you arrive at the house, you go past it. You don't notice it as such. It's just a series of walls. And there is a porch with a little bench, which is a very, well, I know Jørn was really interested in Islamic architecture. A house always has a bench at the entrance for guests to sit. So that's all you see.
And that's common in Islamic architecture?
It is common in Islamic architecture. And he was very interested in Islamic architecture. You can see that in the shells of the Sydney Opera House.
And the bench is clad in a ceramic tile?
I think they're brown, shiny tiles, which is just standard tiles cut diagonally so that they make a pattern. Yeah. Again, everything's standard. And there's a wooden door.
The tiles is a sort of an ongoing thing in, the tiles actually on the Opera House. It seems to be an ongoing sort of piece for John.
Yeah. So you open the door and you're in a little lobby and there's a little crescent-shaped moon aperture, which you can suddenly see the sea. So from the road, there's walls, a door. You go through the door, you're in a little lobby and you see the sea through this crescent. I don't know why it was crescent, but it's probably something to do with, again, Islamic.
And the sun beats down through that at certain times and you get this wonderful crescent moon on
He was interested in shadows. And then you turn right and you go through a doorway into an open courtyard with a colonnade around it in stone, single story. And you're like, wow, because it's just the edge of the courtyard is the water. You're up on a hill, on a cliff, but it's just the sea and the horizon. That's a wow moment. Behind that is a kind of dining kitchen space. Everything's built in stone, everything's stone. So there's no internal plasterwork. It's just, feels cave-like.
Yeah. People have referred to it as a house that in part seems as if it's been there for a long time, but
definitely.
yet it's very somehow new and modern as well. So
He
it
would
has
love
this
you for saying that.
dichotomy.
It's something he wanted. Like any architect like me, you dream of doing one timeless building. He did everything like it was timeless. Everything lasts. It just feels like it's always been there.
Yeah.
So this courtyard feels like it's quite small, but it's really, really powerful. And that's, I guess, where you sit, and part of the colonnade has got a bench. So everything he designed in was in stone and then tiled, so it became petrified. Like if a table was there for a while, he'd build it in stone and clad it in tiles, which is fantastic. Inside and out. His beds are made of blocks with concrete. So once it was fixed, it was there forever. It was like a monastic cell, isn't it?
Yes.
Because the beds are built in as well. You can't, and the table's built in.
Yeah, it's
you don't leave anything.
Yeah. It's quite monasterial in a way.
It is. So the house itself is a collection of 4 pavilions. You have to think of one as essentially the courtyard with the dining space at the back and kitchen. One is a living room, which is one of the most beautiful spaces I've ever been in because it's taller than the buildings around it, the blocks, double height. And there are 5 apertures with very, very deep reveals. You can stand in them. They're human scale, and they taper so that it focuses your view.
And they're splayed at different angles.
They're all splayed at different angles, different times of the day and different viewpoints. And it's astounding. And again, the sofa in there is built in stone with white cushions on. And
in the shape of
in a
crescent shape again.
Yeah. And that's beautiful. It also had a little slit very high up on there. I think it was the eastern wall.
That's right.
No, the west wall. The west wall.
And I think this came at a later stage, did
yes,
it not?
he'd seen Leverance's church in Clippan, which has these little slits with glass just glued in, no frame. So he just put it up there and it becomes like a sundial across.
It renders that whole rear elevation, oceanside elevation.
And of course it moves. In fact, when I sat on the sofa with him, it was doing that and he was loving it.
Yeah, and so in this room, as you're looking out to sea, he's mounted the windows on the outside of the facade, so you don't see any window frames. The window frames are on the outside. So it's almost like your connection to the ocean is greater because it's just glass, no frame.
That's right. There's nothing between you and nature, which would, that delighted him.
Yeah.
And of course, when you're sat there, you're thrown out. You feel like you're almost being catapulted out of the room into the ocean. At the same time, the ocean's coming at you in 5 slices. Sort of push and pull.
Yeah.
It's quite a thing to achieve with such simple means.
But apparently when he was designing this house, he laid out some sugar cubes in a cafe.
He did it in sugar cubes, and that's absolutely true. And he did it on a table in front of me in a little cafe nearby, yeah.
Okay, so just to get this correct, he explained the design of the house with sugar cubes?
He did.
To you? And
yes.
Do you think that was part of his initial design evolution at the beginning?
So if you look deep into what Utzon's work was about, part of it was a thing called additive architecture, his own phrase. It's about everything being made of components that essentially are the same. So if you look at the house, it's made of blocks of stone, this beautiful creamy coloured stone, same stone that Maris stone.
Yeah.
Same stone that Palma Cathedral in Mallorca is made of.
Right.
But this was just cut rough, but it's 400 or 40 centimetres by 20. That's it. That's the module.
Yeah, the module, yeah.
So he laid it out on site, literally one-on-one, one-to-one scale. There were no drawings. His son had done the planning drawings, but Jørn only ever did freehand drawings. He didn't use straight edges. He drew beautifully. He drew in front of me. It's like, wow. But he thought in terms of elements. So those elements make the building. So very easy to measure because everything was on a 40 centimetre or 20 minor dimension. Right. Yeah. 20, 40, 80. That was it. Everything was on that.
Right.
And you think of him as the opera house shells, and they're actually ribs. They're all the same. They just rotate on the geometry of a sphere, don't they?
Yes, yeah.
But it took a long time to get to that with the engineer. But his houses are very elemental and simple.
Yeah. And at the back, the roadside of this space, the level is slightly higher.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that affords people the ability to look further down. Is that how you saw that level change?
That's right. He was fond of saying birds know instinctively where to nest on a cliff.
Yeah.
Everything he told me about design related to nature. Everything.
Right.
No other reference to other architects as such.
Yeah. He has a quote that, if I get it right, the beaches, the seas, the forest, and the clouds are his, what was it, his studio or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And I think for me, one of the interesting things about the house is that it does combine very local materials and a local methodology, but yet he's got the reinforced concrete I-beams that play such a significant role.
Yeah.
And to a certain extent, in my mind, this is a building that is now shifting the tract of modernism from something that is the white villa into something that's hyper-regional. It's not ashamed to use vernacular materials in vernacular ways, but yet it's clever because it combines with the prefabricated concrete I-beams. And for that reason, I think it's an amazing building.
It is, and it's very Danish in that way as well. You know, he's not the only one that was looking at natural materials, and he's more a kit of parts designer. He had an uncanny ability, which is what makes him a great architect, to tap into whatever culture he's in. Whatever you think of the Sydney Opera House, it's a work of genius. It came to represent an entire nation. Can Lis represents Catalan architecture. He called it Catalan rather than Spanish, Mallorca. And he tapped into that vernacular. You see it everywhere you go, all the fields, all the field walls, all the farms, are all made of that same stone. And he created a modern version of that vernacular. Even when you look at the Q80 Parliament that he built, it epitomised Islamic architecture in a modern way. So wherever he goes, he picked up on the vernacular, the culture, and interpreted it in a new way. That's clever.
Yeah. I think it's hard to think that how Sydney Opera House just sums up a country and is so representative of a particular country, and yet Can Lis is on that journey in a way.
It is
epitomising architecture from that era.
And Jørn did not like it being called iconic. It's become iconic.
That's somehow ironic because there's a sign outside saying iconic house. Yeah,
I know. He didn't like that. And of course, Gary, he became that kind of architect who makes iconic buildings. But Jørn said to me, he's a very different kind of architect to me. I know what he meant. I've met Gary when I was a student. He's fantastic. And he's a wonderful architect, but he has no relationship to Jørn's philosophy of work whatsoever.
And Jørn saw himself as a very different architect from Gary.
More rooted in nature. Gary is more rooted in the possibilities of form. Brilliant though he is. Different thing.
Yeah. John, do you think Utzon had a certain philosophical position, like some of his other architects, Corb, Kahn, etc.?
Utzon never really talked about philosophy.
Right.
That wasn't his way. He was only interested in nature, the simple things. He was very interested in other cultures. He absorbed them incredibly well. But no, he wrote almost nothing. He wasn't into trying to describe his buildings philosophically at all.
So it's culture and nature as the driver of his work.
Definitely nature. You know, and it's what I do in my work. You look, where's the sun? Mm. How much shade do you need? Where's the noise? Where's the view?
Yes.
Which way does the wind blow all the time and annoy you?
Yeah.
Those things. That you can explain everything he does from just looking carefully at where it's placed and in what culture it's placed as well.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting reflections is that he actively didn't want to be part almost of a bigger architectural canon, modernism, deconstruction, postmodernism. No. He was in a certain lane, and that's what interested him.
That's very true. He showed no interest really in isms or what was going on in the world in terms of modern architecture. He just wanted to produce things that were timeless. And
I think in that way, it could be argued that he really laid the ground for other great architects that have also won the Pritzker Prize, like Glenn Murcutt, who is heavily driven by nature, by culture, by context, by climate. So to a certain extent, Utzon was the forefather of this new type of hyper-contextual modernism.
You're so right. I'm lucky enough to have sat down and had lunch with Glenn Murcutt many years ago. I was the first guy to ever knock on his door from the UK.
Did you mention Utzon?
Of course.
And what was
I hadn't met Utzon at that time.
Oh, okay.
But Murcutt loved his work. Of course he did. Like anybody who really gets deep into Utzon, he just had to put Sydney Opera House aside as a piece of genius and look at his other work. It's like Can Lis. And Murcutt is easily, for me, the best architect working in the world today. At 88, he's still working.
Right.
It's astounding. And he's explored the principles of nature even beyond where Utzon got to.
Okay, and had you any conversations with Glenn Murcutt with respect to Can Lis?
No, I didn't. I think it was just too soon in my years to really understand Can Lis at that point.
Right.
So it was a good few years before I really absorbed the deeper parts of Utzon's work.
Yeah, but I think in conclusion, it's fair to say that Utzon, through Glenn Murcutt, maybe Peter Suchbury, etc., Utzon's thoughts, ideas, philosophies are still with us very much so.
They're still there.
Yeah.
I think Murcutt's put in the sustainability aspect to a much greater extent than Utzon would have ever have thought of.
Yeah, and again, an architect who draws by hand.
Oh, it's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. How can you build a house off 4 A1 sheets of paper? That's what he does. It's amazing. And he was a lovely man too.
I'd just like to talk a little bit about perhaps some of the unfair criticism of this house. Some people have said he misjudged the climate. Some people said, some of the waterproofing detail is flawed. Do you think that's a fair reflection? Did it worry John?
No. I think the house worked perfectly for them for many, many years. Ultimately, yes, he, like many architects, he spent too much time, once upon a time, on drawing boards with lights on. Eyesight can get a little bit difficult when you're older. He had issues with his eyesight, which is why he always wore dark sunglasses. So I think the intensity of light, but that didn't change when he moved up the hill to the other house. What changed at Can Lis and drove them away was a Club 1830 holiday park that developed nearby. And he had this boat. I saw it every day I was there, coming by, and on the loudspeaker you could hear them saying, "This is the home of the architect of the Sydney Opera House."
Right.
And his treasured privacy was broken. That's when he developed the second side up on the hill and moved there in 94.
Yeah, you can imagine for Jørn and Liz leaving Australia and wanting a private life, this was quite an upheaval to have to move again.
Yes. Yes, it was, without question. He'd be annoyed that they've renamed it Jørn Utzon Street now. He wouldn't like that.
Okay.
But that's, I guess, fame.
Yes. John, you visited perhaps the 20 of the most famous architectural houses on the planet. Maybe you could just give some perspective on how Can Lis fits into that canon of 20 of the best houses.
Well, for me, it's in the top 2 or 3, and it always will be. I think partly that's an emotional attachment because I adored the man and I love his work, but it really is so different from what most architectural projects from the 20th century are. They're all of a family, essentially, modernism.
Right.
And only Louis Kahn pulled away from that more so, and Utzon. Utzon's very unique.
Yes.
Can Lis is very unique. It truly is one of the best houses on the planet. You just need to walk in the door and it knocks you flat. Yes, it feels like it's been there forever, but it doesn't feel like you're in Rome. It feels like you're in Mallorca. It's funny, again, because everybody knows, I think, in our world, that Villa Savoye by Le Corbusier in 1929 is the seminal house of the century for its ideas. It's also a failure as a place to live. I think the opposite is true of Can Lis. It's a great place to live. It's stone, but that stone is what they use for field farm walls and things. It will degrade, but, it'll make a fantastic ruin. I don't know if Utzon would have been worried about its future. I think he wouldn't mind it being a great ruin.
Yeah.
But I always presumed he thought the Catalan government would take it on one day.
And you made the point, many architects at the time didn't really know about this particular house.
It wasn't in circulation. There was no drawings of it. I did those.
And that's Utzon's wish that it wasn't in circulation.
Yeah, that's why we got to him at the right time. I think he wanted a legacy. He wanted his work to be told the way he wanted it.
Yes.
And every word in that book was read by Utzon. And my secondary book on the house itself.
Right. So he was controlling his legacy.
Totally. And he was delighted by it. He changed a few things. Any hints at criticism of certain people came out.
Right.
Things like that on Sydney,
Yeah. Yeah. And it was a house that did change during his lifetime. The parapet walls, if you look at the drawings which maybe you had done. And if you go there now, you'll see clay barrel vaulted tiles on top of the parapets to aid in some of the waterproofing issues that he had.
Yeah, I mean, that stone is very porous, and he quickly learnt.
Yeah.
And yes, he fixed it the way they did in the Vernacular in Mallorca anyway.
Yes.
And there's a lovely detail, you would have seen it, the little triangular cap to the chimney. That's textbook straight out of any house in Mallorca.
And for the people that haven't been there, that one of those is just right above the kitchen hob.
That's right.
So that purges heat from the top. And again, Corb probably wouldn't have done that.
Corb wouldn't have done that, no. Not at all. He was more interested in higher abstract matters, wasn't he?
Yes. So this is Utzon again, changing modernism to be much more local and much more contextual.
Very well. Yeah, absolutely.
Fascinating stuff. So, John, the house today is still connected to the family who still use it now and again. It's also run by the Utzon Foundation. The house is available for rent. The house is also part of the iconic house network. And the house is also linked to the Henrik Frode Obel Foundation. How would you like to see the building being used in the years to come?
I think it's very well looked after right now by the Utzon Foundation. That seems appropriate. But my knowledge of other great houses, they all become museums. So if you think of Falling Water, it's the most visited building, Frank Lloyd Wright's famous house in Pennsylvania. It's nearly 200,000 visitors a year. And the visitor centre's 5 times bigger than the house itself. So most modern houses end up becoming museums, and I think that's where it'll end up. It's sort of halfway there at the moment.
Right.
Not a bad thing.
Not a bad thing. And in terms of how this house summarizes Utzon's legacy, I mean, arguably it's there to illustrate Utzon on the back foot, Utzon moving away from the press, but yet in a way shot himself in the foot because it's such a beautiful house. So many people want to come and visit it.
That is true, isn't it? He made it so beautiful for himself and his world. Yeah, that is so true. There's a conundrum, isn't it?
It is, yeah. John, it's been fantastic talking to you today here in your studio in Hampshire. Just before we go, for me, visiting Can Lis has just been almost life-changing. Have you got any further thoughts you'd like to add about your studies and conclusions with respect to Can Lis?
Yeah, there's an emotion to it. But stepping aside from that, what it teaches architects, I think, as Louis Kahn does, is the power of the elemental, the things that can't change, the things that fix a building in its place and, explore the journey of the sun across the sky. And the power and the beauty of nature, that's what drives it. I think more than ever now, architects are beginning to look at the cycle of a building, the life cycle, the energy it takes, how you get free energy from the sun, which is a gift of nature, all that stuff. Utzon was doing that a long time ago.
And for that reason, he'll be remembered as one of the greats.
I think he'll always be remembered as one of the greats of the Sydney Opera House, but actually his other work is better.
Yeah.
In my view.
John, it's been a real privilege and honour
James.
talking to you today. Thank you very much for your time. Next time on An Architect's Perspective, I'm visiting the Wimbledon House, a striking example of high-tech modernism. Lightweight steel structure, prefabricated panels, and open-plan interiors come together to create a home designed for modern life, simple, open, and flexible. I toured the house with Abe, the son of the architects Richard and Sue Rogers. The full video will be on YouTube if you'd like to watch, or if you prefer to listen, just search for An Architect's Perspective wherever you get your podcasts.